And within about 5 minutes, one of my friends wrote back to me on email and he said, "You do realize that that was photoshopped, don't you?" And it turns out that there are giant jellyfish. They're about the size of your torso. They're not that big. And that was probably this is a journey of constant mistakes for me. And really honestly, like my whole, it's like, I think when anybody, if you risk something and try something, you're going to fail more frequently than actually succeed. But after I was completely mortified, I started to do more investigation, and I found out that actually the truth was a lot worse than even that image. And this is the carcass of a giant albatross that was found in the North Pacific Gyre, which is one of the 5 garbage islands that we see that are floating around in the ocean. You can see them from space. They cover 40% of the Earth's ocean surface and 25% of the surface of land. In the entire surface of the Earth. So literally, and I didn't know this as a designer, even though I've created so many products that rely on plastic, but every single piece of plastic that we've basically used since the 1950s, with the exception of 0.009%, which was incinerated, it's still with us. Plastic does not go away. And all of this stuff is made of plastic. If you look around, you probably have 5 pieces of plastic on your person. And it all ends up in the ocean, and it all ends up in animals and in our food cycle as well. And so it's a really terrifically huge problem. And if you start to think about it, designers especially, but also consumers, there's no wonder we're in this position because we have such a fetish around the object. And designers in particular are fed by this notion of the, we have this iconic image of the iPod, and it's become this great reference point for clients because they see the iPod as just this wonderful market success. And so they constantly are saying, well, I want the iPod of this, or I want the iPod of that. I had a client once ask me for the iPod of diapers. And actually they were building a sensor for potty training, for toilet training, that would buzz the child ever so slightly when they wet their diaper. And it wasn't until I was toilet training my own children that I thought, God, that was a great idea. But we believe that we are, as designers and as in the creative community, we believe we're in the business of making objects, but in fact, we're really in the business of making consequences. And you have to really kind of understand how the negative impact has this sort of hockey stick. It just goes up, flying over time. When we talk about ideation and design, distribution and use and end of life. And for designers or members of the creative community, and I talk about design as including researchers and strategists and engineers, people who are constructing these things, and many of you touch this life cycle if you're not explicitly designers too, but we think about our zone of control, and it's a very tightly bounded place where we say, well, the decisions I can make are only this many. But actually, we have this tremendous zone of influence where all of those decisions we make early on in the cycle affect all of the things downstream. And if we started to take responsibility for the zone of influence, you can imagine that we could actually lower that impact over time, which is a pretty profound effect if people started to work together. And imagine if we could actually start to think about technology and human factors in business and brand and organization alongside with sustainability, that it wasn't a line item or an option or, let's remove plastic bags, that it was actually part of the entire system. And from that, I created, sort of out of all of this, the convergence of all of these different thoughts and feelings about it, I created something called the Designer's Accord. And what it is, it's a global coalition of designers and educators and corporate leaders all working together in a new way to create environmental and social impact. And that new way is really, it basically takes the entire competitive model and actually inverts it, and it says, instead of competing, let's collaborate, because the only way that we are going to be able to increase our education and our understanding of all of these complex problems is by working together. And in fact, if you started to think about these problems by yourself or just in your own business, they're intractable. You just won't be able to come up with the solutions fast enough. There are 5 guidelines that people who adopt the Designer's Accord, 5 guidelines that they decide that they will do. The first one is to declare participation, so it's an entirely viral movement. I think that that's why people have taken it, they're given their attention to the Designer's Accord, because it grew so rapidly. So declare participation. You have to educate your teams first. So it's really starting with the personal. Measure your ethical footprint, which begins with measuring carbon footprint and water footprint, and really sort of understanding what you're using. And it's actually quite irrelevant, because you could be designing bombs and have a zero carbon footprint. But what it does is it provides an initial sort of reference point. The next thing is the one that's most difficult for people, is to talk to each and every client and customer and student and staff member about these issues. It doesn't mean that every product that's created, or every service that's created, or every building that's built is going to be one that's appropriate for the environment, but at least the conversation will have been engaged in. And then finally, there's an idea of a contribution to the commons. So the things that we've through our culture and our industry have constantly believed are private IP, intellectual property, is actually really not intellectual property. It is just like this idea of best practices and process actually are the things that should be shared. And so what the Designers Accord is a real-world community that is also enabled by an online community. And almost every Thursday, every week, every Thursday, there is a Designers Accord event that's happening somewhere around the world. And it's generally a collection of people, 30 to 40 people, that come together in a design studio or a school or in a bar or somewhere, that say, what are the biggest problems that anybody in this group is having at the moment? And they have a chance to kind of talk about those problems in 5 minutes. And everyone in the group, from all sorts of competitors and diverse audience, comes together and actually tries to solve that problem. So it's this real-world, very fast triaging of these questions. And it's grown incredibly quickly. We're now almost at the end of year 2, but it started really as the Kyoto Treaty of Design. And I wrote this article, and I thought it was a call to arms for the design community, and I literally thought that as soon as I published this article that was published online, that people would be calling me and knocking my door and emailing me, and there was nothing. It was absolute dead silence from people. I got an email from a couple of guys in Canada. And then there was a small design firm in Sweden, and it was just like there was no response whatsoever. And so I started to go on the road and talk in different conferences and different groups about what was really happening and why this was important, and that really got some traction. And then corporations and schools joined with the design firms, so it all of a sudden became a much more holistic group. There was a lot of peer pressure, because you can't exactly say, well, if design firm X is adopting this and are undertaking this, you can't exactly opt out. So we had the pentagrams forcing the IDOs, and the IDOs forcing Frog Design, and Frog Design focusing their energy on smart design, and all of these, the most unusual bedfellows getting together.